Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Raposo Coleman. I'm from Indiana University East. I wanted to say thank you to the NFA for having me be here today to present this workshop to you, and to Noah Klein and the staff for managing a live stream for it so that I can share it with other people later. So I'm very glad about that, and I hope we've got some people watching live with us today. So you know that everything that is on the slides is part of the handout that you should have available to you in the guidebook app, so you don't have to write down everything frantically. And if for some reason it's not opening or you're not able to save it, I'll have a QR code at the end that you can scan for where I have it in Google Drive. For those of you watching online, it should also be linked in the notes for the video. So thank you for that. This workshop is based on a warm-up routine I developed about 20 years ago. Just took me a long time to decide that, oh yeah, I should start sharing it with people. But it came from a place of where I had had a lot of years of excellent teaching and been given excellent principles, and in my enthusiasm and my drive to achieve them, my body had manifested a lot of tension in order to get there and to get it done. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had that experience before. You know, your body just wants to get that technique or get that thing, and all of a sudden what feels like strength is actually tension. And I realized that I had built up a lot of tense habits that were actually in the long run inhibiting my ability to make the tone that I wanted and get the facility of technique that I wanted. And in order to get past that, I was going to have to rebuild my technique from the ground up. So that's what led to the development of this warm-up routine. And I can say that 20 years later, it is still the thing that sets me up for practice when I need it. It is just there. So I encourage you to take what you can from this, also recognizing that you are likely going to need to modify it for what works for you and your body. So you have my blessing to take these ideas and work them into a warm-up that works for you. There are a lot of different things I'm going to be talking about today, and I've sort of organized them into a set of guiding principles for you. So I'm going to take a few minutes to go over these. This is about setting up the body for practice. It's not about finding your perfect tone or building your perfect technique. It's about making sure your body is prepared to do that work. You do the warm-up, and then you do your tone development, and you do your technique development, your articulation development. This is not to create those, it is just to make sure you're setting up your body to be prepared for doing it. At the time I was developing this, I was in graduate school. I had the luxury of being able to practice 6 hours a day, and I needed to be able to make sure that my body could do that for everything that I was trying to do. So use this as a way of setting yourself up, and then you take these principles and then you infuse them into your practice so that you are learning to do these things freely, tense-free, efficiently. That's the general idea. So let's get into some of these principles. First, we want to recognize that tension-free playing is more efficient playing. If your body has to work and your muscles have to work, they're not going to move as quickly, right? And so if you're able to have the muscles approaching things, we're never completely relaxed. We'd be a ball of jelly on the floor. But if we have as minimal tension as we can, as minimal engagement of the muscles as we can, the muscles will move more freely, and then therefore more ease, have more ease and efficiency to it. As I've mentioned, we're about preparing the body, and this is a big one. We have to get around the idea that we're not perfecting our sound in this warm-up. We do not aim to make the perfect tone during these exercises. We're setting ourselves up so that when we're doing our tone work, we can be doing it freely and finding good tone in a relaxed way and in an efficient way. We need to be healthy about it. We don't need to be finding tone because we're squeezing all these tiny muscles. We want to make sure it's relaxed and it's open. Of course, in order to do that, we have to be aware of our bodies. And so it's always good just to be able to tap into the muscles. Where am I feeling tension in my body? For me, I feel it a lot in my lower back, in the backs of my legs, in my neck. It's sort of in the center and then works its way down. And I'm always constantly trying to, oh, release that. Oh, loosen the knees, that sort of thing. It took a lot of years to build that up. Alexander technique was a big help with it. If you've ever had the chance to study it, I highly recommend it. But that body awareness will help you be able to recognize when you're building tension in your body and then be able to hopefully release it. So tap into yourself as well in your body awareness. This next one comes from percussionists, actually. The idea that we engage the larger muscles to support the smaller ones. My undergrad, I was a double major, and I was taking my percussion methods class for my music ed requirements. And they were talking about how with all of the technique work they do, their paradiddles and their flams and everything like that, you can imagine the risk of carpal tunnel because of all of these small motions. And they said, no, we're engaging all the muscles from our back and our chest, from our torso. And they compared it to a whip. If you've ever wondered why a whip can be so painful when it's just this tiny little end of a cord, it's not because of that tiny little end. It's because of the energy that's being transferred from these larger muscles and then getting more and more concentrated as it gets smaller down your arm, down the cord of the whip, all the way to that tiny tip. It's the power from your back and your torso that makes a whip so painful. And so I said, so if we're taking that principle, for the hands, that's going to help the technique. But if you also think about all the tiny muscles in the lips and in the cheeks, why not support our sound with these larger muscles from our torso and then let these tinier muscles just be a channel for the sound as well. We don't make our beautiful tone from this, we make it from here. And then less tension is possible as a result. Doing all of this, I had to force myself to accept that slow practice needed to come first, and that I could not speed up what I was doing until I could do it freely. If I cranked up the metronome and I felt my body start to lock as I was trying to do something, I put it back to where I was before. Until it's free, it doesn't go faster. And what that also had to force me to allow myself to accept is that the real change was going to take time. It took me a few years to get to the point where all of these things really clicked in and then went through. But I had also been taking these ideas and working them into my practice. And so all of that to say, you're not going to necessarily click into everything that we do this morning, but hopefully you'll have the chance to explore it and see what happens and then go from there. So these are the things that we're going to be sticking with and what I'll be using as I'm talking through a lot of what we're doing today. So last thing I want to say before we get going is that some of these exercises look funny and sound funny. And so let's treat this room as a safe space. We're going to forget that there are people watching online. Remember, they're just looking at me. They're not going to be able to see you. You're going to be fine. I'm going to be the one that's going to be looking silly sometimes, and that's okay. It's okay if you make not good sounds on the flute. Not good doesn't really exist here. We're just experimenting. These are new approaches that are going to help stretch our limits. And so that's the idea behind this. Speaking of stretching, that's where this all starts. All right, in preparing the body. So go ahead and stand up and put your flutes down. You don't need them right away. And just go through, I'm not going to teach you how to stretch. Everybody has their way of liking to stretch. But think about the parts of the body where you feel your tension and what you'd like to do to stretch. So for me, like I said, I carry a lot of my tension in my shoulders and my lower back. So I'm always paying attention to those. I'm trying to loosen up my shoulder sockets. Sometimes if I'm feeling, especially if I've had to be on the computer doing hours of email or something, or grading for work, I pay attention to my wrists, make sure they get some love. For me as well, I do a lot of just careful stretching like this to help the lower back and the hamstrings and all that go. And usually if I stay here long enough, I do find the back releases and eventually I'm able to touch my toes. So it gets there. But you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up. Yep, I do those too. You got to get some, hip rotations. Get the torso going. So yeah, you might as well, right? It's the best way to start off every day, not just when we're practicing, is just get the body stretched out and ready to be as efficient as we can. All right. As far as, you know, more specific to the flute, I love to start with this breathing exercise. When we think about tension, when we breathe naturally, we don't lock or we tense up, right? We just sort of breathe in, and when we're ready to exhale, we breathe out. There's just a very natural cycle to it. How do we get that cycle into how we breathe when we play? I recognized that I didn't want to have that moment where I stop and held the breath. You know, when you breathe in and you go, and that moment when the throat locks, I didn't want that at all. And so I said, all right, I'm going to practice a breathing exercise where I'm breathing in, and then as soon as I'm done breathing in, I start breathing out. So you have to, it's just that quick moment where it flips direction. And then when I'm done breathing out, I breathe in again. You're allowed to sit down or stop doing it if you get dizzy, by the way. When I first started doing this, I had to as well. Eventually you get used to it. But the idea is to create this cyclical breathing with no stopping other than that quick moment of switching direction. And we do it on a pattern. So I start off and I do 4 repetitions of each. So 4 beats in, 4 beats out, 4 times, and then I start shortening the window. 3 beats in, 3 beats out, 2 beats, 1 beat, 4 times each. The goal, another goal of this, in addition to making sure that we're not creating any throat tension while doing the breathing, is to see if we can expand the amount of air that we're taking in, which means actually not just doing the breath in a natural way, but especially as it speeds up, engaging the torso muscles to help us get all of that air in and out. Because believe it or not, by the time you get it to 1 beat in, 1 beat out, you have to engage these muscles to push it out. If you don't get rid of all the air, you're not creating a vacuum that then needs to be filled so you can maximize what you're doing. See what I mean about how we're going to be making funny sounds and doing funny things? So yeah, really just as you try this, don't just settle for whatever you breathe in and whatever you breathe out. Try to expand the amount of air that you're taking in and taking out with this. All right, I've got a little metronome click to help us with it. I use 60 just to help count. As I count us off to begin this, use that count off to exhale what you've got in your lungs. So you can really start with as much of an empty tank as possible. So let's see how it goes. All right, 1, 2, ready, and. How's that feel? Yeah? Sometimes it helps to put your hands somewhere on your torso. I love when I do this, feeling my ribs, seeing if I can feel them expand. Whatever it is to help sort of tap into your body and tune into it, you can do. I also recommend breathing through the mouth, especially as it gets faster, because if we're just breathing through the nose, sometimes it causes the soft palate to change places and start doing things that are a little tense. So if you do it through the mouth, it helps relax everything. It's a great way to stretch out all these muscles, so enjoy it. We're gonna do 3 in, 3 out. 1, 2, ready, and. Everybody okay? Yeah, it's a lot of oxygen. All right, good. And it also dries out the mouth. So if you need some water, by all means, take a sip. By the way, this exercise works great for expanding into a breathing exercise. Usually after I do it this way, if I'm wanting to work on my breathing more, I then leave it as 1 beat in, 4 beats out, 1 beat in, 5 beats out, with the idea of by the time I get to 15 or 16 beats out, can I do it in a way that isn't gripping the sound? The air? Is the air moving freely? Because then I know I have the ability to make a soft sound like Gareth Davis did last night, this tiny little beautiful pianissimo, right? Because he has just that ease of blowing his air. Gosh, he's so soft. It's good. Okay. So, oh, nope. There we go. All right. The first thing I do with my flute is a modification on Moïse's de la Sonorité half-step warm-up. We've all done it, right? Right, and so on and so forth. But again, I found that I was often trying to get my lips engaged with making all this beautiful tone in this warm-up. And so I said, all right, how can I really get my lips to let it go? And I decided I was going to huff into the flute. No articulation, and no real focus of the embouchure. I wanted the support for the sound to come from these larger muscles. And so when I first started doing this, it was really just a, and whatever came out, came out. And then the idea was, could I eventually get to the point where I knew how to huff at the angle that I needed to get the right sound? And so what started originally as turned into. Does that make sense? So yeah, so what we're going to try is this. Let it come out however it comes out. You know approximately what angle to blow in to play an A, right? So give that a try and see what happens. But don't overwork your lips to do it. Let them channel the air without doing it. I also like to breathe in between each one of those eighth notes in the sense of keeping it all open, resetting it. It also sets me up so I have a nice full tank for the whole note as that goes. So you can see on the screen, it's 4 eighth notes, on, one on each beat, a whole note, and then we slur into the next note going down. We're not going to go all the way down because of time, but let's give it a try and see how it feels. So here we go. 1. You can stand up or sit, whatever you're more comfortable doing. You might need some space, so feel free to move around the room as needed as well. Here we go. 1, 2, ready? How's it feel? How is all this? Is it? Yeah, the breathing sets this up really well. I find if I don't do the breathing exercise first, sometimes you're in a rush. You're like, I know how to breathe. It really does help loosen up all these muscles to get it going. Yeah, it does get more difficult as you get to other parts of the range. So, of course, we were just about to get to E. We know that E is a note that likes to crack. So that takes more focus. As you get down lower, obviously the direction is going to change. It's very easy to miss. You can start getting harmonics, but eventually you sort of find the angle. There it is. When you get up high, it's really lovely to be able to just release. Because, of course, after we get down to the bottom, we go back to the A and we work our way up. And it's okay if you're hearing air. It's okay if you're hearing all that other stuff. Just huffing into that flute. It's actually quite enjoyable eventually once you get used to it. So yeah, so that's the first warm up I do with the flute after I get the stretching and the breathing done. The next one is what I call reverse harmonics. How many people have ever practiced harmonics where you start on low C and you go right? Many of us have learned how to do that, and we do that as a way of checking our support. Who's ever had the experience where you find that you're trying to make a lot of those changes with your lips, right? I found that I was doing all this harmonic work and I was squeezing my lips to make the harmonics come out. And I said, and it just wasn't working. I was getting some level of flexibility, but it was still a tiny sound. And I said, okay. And then around the same time, my teacher at the time said, support your low register the way you support your high register. And I said, okay, well, in order to do that, let me really figure out how I'm supporting my high register. And that's sort of where this came from. So you know how by the time you get to the higher harmonics, there's more than one fingering for them? Like a high F, you can actually play using different harmonics. You can get them on an F, but then you can actually also get them on a B flat. If you're fingering a B flat, you can get them on a low D flat. So I said, all right, let me see if I can figure out all the different fingerings on the higher harmonics and see if I can support that harmonic with all of this, no matter which of those fingerings I'm using. So just to use F as an example, if I take, since that's the one I'm talking about, that's the real fingering, but then here's the B flat, here's the lower F, and the D flat. When I first started doing it, they didn't all come out. Sometimes they just don't. But because what it was is the more fingers are down, the more resistance you have, the more support it takes for them to come out. So I said, all right, I know how to play a high F. Let me start with that and then make sure I have enough air for all the harmonics. So what this turns into is using our high fingerings as the starting point for the harmonics rather than the low ones. So that's the first thing about it, I'll say. I was also experimenting with singing and playing at the time. And I loved the way the vibrations of the singing and playing happening at the same time helped loosen up the muscles. And so I said, let me put these two things together, and it worked. So I'm going to demonstrate for you the final product of where this all goes, but then we're going to work through how to build to that. So this is how I do them when I'm practicing at home. Which is how I test at the end. Am I supporting my low register the way I'm supporting my high register? So that's the idea behind that. And I think my head joint actually moved while I was doing that. So there, that's better. All right. So, and by the way, if you ever have one of those days where you're heading to a 10 a.m. rehearsal and you slept late and you have a 90-minute drive to get there and you don't have time to warm up, this whole thing, once you get used to it, takes about 5 minutes. It's my go-to warm up in that thing. If that's all you've got time to do, go for this one. All right. So this is what it looks like. And on the handout, I have done this for all the notes that I do. So I actually started on high A and then I work my way down to C chromatically. The high note is the note that you're aiming to keep going through all of it. And the notes you see below are the fingerings you're moving through as you're doing it. So for right now, everybody just take an F, start on our normal F fingering, and then at whatever pace you need to, try out keeping that F while you work through a B flat, a lower F, and a D flat. So just give it a go and see what comes out. Yeah. We get a lot of different sounds. The lips don't always want to let that happen. There is something to say for how eventually your lips get used to all this air. Part of why we build the tension in our lips is because we're blasting it with all of this airstream and they're resisting as a way of protecting themselves. And so to let it go actually takes a little work. Yeah. What's that? You can use either. Yeah, either one works. Um, so yeah, the idea is to eventually be able to move through all of those in this rhythm. Anybody want to try it? So it's about ya, da, 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 da. I'm totally singing the wrong pitches, but you get the idea. Ya, da, 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 da. See what happens. So give it a go. 1, 2, ready. And yeah, how'd it go? Get some of them? Anybody able to get all of them right from the start? Yeah, that means you're so relaxed. You did not build up the tension habits that I have had. So yeah, all right. Now the singing and playing, if you're not as we sometimes do it, when we're doing a piece, but we don't necessarily make it a part of our warm-ups. I started out doing it by, first of all, I chose the lowest octave possible because I found that if I was trying to do a higher octave, I was building tension in my throat. And so sometimes it sounds guttural. I'm using basically from C4, middle C, down to low C in my singing and playing range when I'm warming up. So when I'm singing that F, it's down here. And so if you just sort of try out and I would basically start singing an F and then bring the flute to the face. So give that a try. Is it working? Yeah, it's an interesting feeling. It's an interesting vibration in the lips when you're doing that, and that makes it even harder sometimes for the lips to handle the strength of your airstream as it goes. So give yourself time to let it build. If it didn't work quite right away, it'll get there. And then it's even trickier when you change the harmonics to keep it going. So give it a try now. See if you can keep that F going even while you're changing the fingerings while you're singing. How's it feel? It's not, I admit it's not easy. I admit it's not easy, but again, we don't get this in a day. It took me a while to get to the point where I could go through this exercise in an efficient way. But it's fun to explore it actually. Just to be like, let's feel this vibration here today. Oh, that one's new. And then you see what comes up with it. You have to free up all this expectation of being able to get something in a day or a week or a month. You see how it goes. It starts eventually getting disconcerting if it never clicks in, but then maybe that means you need to find a different way. You need to modify a way that works for your body and for what you're doing. As long as you're sticking with the principles of it, you'll get to what works for you. So yeah, like I said, the handout has the chart of how all of them work. So you can have fun experimenting with all the different fingerings. And eventually you just come to memorize them. It's chromatic. It just goes down a half step on all of them each time. So yeah, all right. The next battle I wanted to approach had to do with articulation. We've done Taffanel Gobert where you rotate through all of the articulation patterns that they have at the top of the chart and everything. I had moved away. I know this is sacrilege, but I had moved away from practicing Taffanel Gobert number 4 for my scales because it took a while going through all of those modes, and I had switched to the Moyes daily exercises, and in that one, letter A are these full range scales that look like this. Letter A is the major scales, letter B is the minor scales, because you get through your scales much more quickly. And so I said, all right, how can I, now granted, this is not replacing your scale practice. This is a different thing. But I said, let me use these scales as a way to see if I can set up relaxed articulation that is still even, which is the trick. A lot of times we engage tension in order to make sure we're tonguing evenly, and I wanted to get away from that. And so I said, all right, using a rotation, but oh, and that also changes depending on where in the range you are, the ability to do that. So I said, all right, I'm going to use my full range scales and I'm going to go through a variety of articulation patterns applying these principles. And so I said, all right, can I huff a scale? You know, just being able to go. So the same way we were huffing in that half step exercise, same idea with this. Then I said, could I emulate that huff when I'm still tying? When I'm still cutting, because I wanted to strengthen the cuff for my double tongue. So right? Could I do it where the sound was just coming out, but all of this was loose? And that was the idea. And like I said with the half step exercise, to begin with, it didn't always come out. But eventually you figure out how to blow it with all of this strength, with all of this strength that comes from these muscles to support the air, and the lips are just free, and you just figure out where to direct it. And eventually this turned into a rotation. So the rotation looks kind of like this. I came up with 9 different ones and there are 12 scales. So I said, all right, we're going to slur a scale 3 times just to allow that freedom of the air. So I always start whichever scale I'm starting on a given day, and I rotate that too. Sometimes I'm overdoing it. But I have a rotation of all 12 scales in which one I start a different one every day so that all the scales get all the exercises every 12 days. And that I always start with a slurred scale. Then I do the haws, then I do the tas, then I do the caws, then I do another slur. And then we start doing the patterns. So double tonguing twice on each note with a ta-ka. Then on the next scale, it'll be ka-ta, right? So working the way up. And then on the next one after that, it's just one note per articulation, and so on, right? Again, if you can't play it at that tempo, it doesn't matter for the sake of double tonguing in this. You can do your articulation exercises later. Slow it down. That way you can verify that everything is coordinating and coming out at the right time and happening freely. Then you get another slur to just reset after all that double tonguing. And then I was thinking, how do I approach triple tonguing? I have never had success doing tucka-tucka-tucka. That has just always, no matter how many times I tried it, confused my tongue in terms of using a duple tonguing approach on a triple pattern. So I've always been, for those of you that can do it, more power to you. I couldn't. So I've always been a tucka-ta-tucka-ta-tucka-ta person when it came to triple tonguing. And so I said, all right, well, so numbers 10 and 11 are practicing going tucka-ta, but in a different rhythm. So going ta, tucka-ta, tucka-ta, tucka-ta. So it's putting a little pause between each one of those versus going. And then the next one is tucka-ta, 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 tucka-ta. And then you do the triple at the end for the last one. So all of them different combinations that do all the different things we need to do when we're tonguing, but I was doing them in a way using these scales so I could just measure, am I doing it with all of that freedom going. All that looseness, all of that stuff, just letting it out. And that's kind of the idea with it. So should we try a couple? See how it goes? All right, stand up. If you're not familiar with doing full range scales, do a 2-octave scale, whatever works for you. And we all know how to slur a scale. We've been doing it for a while. Let's do some haws. And let's start, well, F major is the example. Let's use F. So here we go. Ready? always fun when it breaks into the round. Yeah. How'd that feel? Yeah. Now let's skip the tuz and try it on ka. Let's try G major, just for the sake of something different. So really just keep all this loose. Keep even the ka loose. You don't want your tongue to get too tired and too with it all. Breathe in between if you can. That also helps keep the tongue loose. See how that goes. Here we go. Ready? How'd it feel? Notice how I keep asking that. It's all about how it feels in this process. How does it feel in your body? Are you tensing things up or are you doing it freely? All right. We don't have the time to experiment with all of these now, but I hope that gives you enough of an idea of how to approach it. When you do start putting in the double tonguing and all of that together, just remember, nice floppy tongue, no tension, taka, 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 taka. There's no need to rush it. You can work on how fast you can tongue Carnival of the Animals later. You're just setting up your body to be able to do that practice later. All right, so nice and relaxed, just giving the tongue an opportunity to be supported as you're setting up all of this air. Yeah, I mean, I use the T's and the K's, but it could be D's and G's, whatever works for you. Sometimes we need both. My neutral tonguing is sort of halfway between T and D, so I've never really known what to call it for myself. Yeah, so yeah, it doesn't always have to have the force of the T or the K. It's more about all of this being loose and all of this doing the support. So that's what we're going out for that. All right, the last exercise I do as part of my warm-up and then get on with the rest of my practice day has to do with vibrato. I was blessed to be able to do my master's degree overseas in London, and some really wonderful teacher and very famous flutist who will remain nameless love to talk about those Americans and their nanny goat vibrato. And he was going to make sure I didn't have that. So it sort of made me think, okay, well, where does that nanny goat vibrato come from? Well, a lot of times it's because we're vibrating up here, right? We're trying to create the vibration, and we know that the vibration comes from the throat. Like there are muscles in the throat that are moving when we're creating vibrato. It's just a question of, do you remember how I said how like I was given good principles, but then I would manifest them in a way that induced tension at the beginning? That's sort of what happens. We say, okay, well, it comes from the throat, and so we use our throat to create vibrato. Well, no, really what's going on is it's starting from here. The vibrato is happening when the sound is actually being created, when the air is hitting the flute. The resulting movement in our throat is almost a sympathetic response to what is going on. We are not intentionally moving the muscles in our throat to get a vibrato into our sound. So I said, all right, let me make sure I'm not doing it from here, that I'm supporting from here, the big, large muscles. And then what needs to change in order to get vibrato? Well, it's a slight undulation in airstream. So I said, all right, let me start messing with my airstream. And I thought back to my high school geometry class, sines and cosines, our trigonometry class, sines and cosines. And I said, all right, remember how I was talking about the breathing in and out without stopping? I wanted to make sure that the wave that I was making with my vibrato was not looking like a heartbeat monitor, where it goes, where it was just this big sharp jab and then a flat line. I wanted the vibrato to actually be a wave, to be a smooth, even wave. And so I started saying, all right, let me approach it like that. It's always increasing or decreasing with just those focal points where it would change. And I started messing with it, just sort of going. And really wanted to see how far could I go before the note would crack, because we're so afraid of cracking, we tend to back off. I could do it with perfectly acceptable wave, but not very big, and not necessarily using all the capability of support that I had the ability to use. So I started going, all right. Where could I push it to? Where were the limits? And I found that as I did this more over time, the limits got further away. The lips got used to doing that, and I could actually make a bigger wave. Do we need that in the long run? We're never going to really actually vibrate like that in a piece unless the composer is calling for it. But again, it's not about the ultimate goal for the vibrato. It's about setting it up with the support in here. So by doing this type of exercise, I was just actually teaching my body how to create this channel for the vibrato that wasn't relying on these smaller muscles in my neck and my throat to do it. So I decided to use whole tone scales because there's only 2 of them, and if I did them full range, I could cover every single note on the flute every day when doing this. Again, maybe over-organized it a little bit, but that's also my personality. So you can see it. We've got the 2 whole tone scales here in a full range setting. And then as I got used to it, what the routine turned into was getting used to a series of pulses for it. So I would start on the first whole tone scale doing 8th note waves. So by the time I work my way up to the top, you get up to that G sharp and to the A sharp. Then I would switch it to triplets. Note that it's not necessarily very pretty. It's okay. These are the muscles that are getting engaged for it. I'm pushing the limits of it, just trying to get these muscles strengthened for it. Coming down in triplets, and I do the next whole tone scale, 16th notes, get to the top, sextuplets, coming back down. Please do not try the 16th notes or the sextuplets anytime soon. It took a while before I was able to get to that subdivision. Today, we're actually just going to try 1 beat waves. So to be able to go, and I encourage you to crack and spit and do whatever else you need to do in order to make it happen. So here's the metronome. And just see what you can do. Remember, we're not emulating a heartbeat. Nice, even waves. Pick any note you want. The more cacophonous this is, the more fun it'll be. So pick a note and just nice big. Oh, by the way, if you have a hard time doing it in 1 beat waves, like in quarter note waves, do half note waves. And that way it might just be a. Feel it however you need to feel, get used to what it feels like physically in order to be able to do it. So here we go. Pick any note and ready. Watch the beat. Good. Try it again, but go to a completely different part of your range because it's going to feel different. Here we go. Ready? Good. Now think about the fingering you just did, how many fingers you were pressing down, and go to the opposite. So for example, I was doing C. I'm probably going to go down to like low E, to an E flat or something. So I have a lot more fingers down. You had a lot more fingers that way. Do one that has a lot more, fewer. All right. Try another one. Here we go. Ready? So what I hope you're noticing is that it actually changes depending on what note you're playing, you know, and so the support of it is going to shift depending on where you are. And that again taps back into what I was saying at the beginning. It takes time to get used to all this, to get our bodies to do it in this relaxed way. Lots of support here. If you ever have the opportunity to try, if you haven't done this yet, I highly recommend trying to retrain your body to breathe from breathing in like this, where we go up. When I was, yay high, an opera singer came to my school and did a demonstration and talked about how she breathed in here, and I thought, oh, that's cool, and so I started doing it just because I was a dork that way, and just to see if could I breathe in, without lifting my shoulders. You will get more out of it. It also helps engage all these muscles in a really lovely way. If you're not sure how to approach that, I did it by lying down on my couch, because then it has to do with just physics and gravity. That's why we do it like this to begin with, just normally. And where you're lying on a couch, up and down is this way, not that way. So that will help as well. Trying to think of any other nuggets that helped me through it, but really it's just about time and allowing yourself the time to figure all that out. Are there any questions about anything? Yeah, Allie. Yeah, as you can imagine, I don't go through all of this with my younger students. Usually it's just about the freedom with air. I find that especially students that are in band programs, you ever notice that when the band director is doing one of those exercises of like, let's hold this long tone as long as possible. And so the flutists are learning to squeeze onto that air so that they can make their note last as long as an oboe or a clarinet, which just isn't going to happen. They're going to outplay us every single time. The flute needs air, and that's what I tell them. The flute needs air to play. So I approach it that way. Just let the flute have air. And hopefully in that process, they are loosening this up in order to let the air out. My high school students, the ones who are a little bit more invested and are practicing regularly, they can pick up on this. They do the huffing half steps and all that other stuff. Usually by that point, they've been doing the regular sonorite for a year or so, and they're kind of bored with it. And so it's a nice way of giving them something new with it. So yeah, you have to read each student based on what they can do. But as long as it's just about keeping it loose and tension and anti-tension, and that's how I modify it for them. Other questions? Yes. Yes. Yeah. You have to be able to get all of this loose first. I did find that when I start, what I would do is I would do this stuff, and then I would do the actual de la sonorite, half steps, and I'd have the tuner on so I could see it. But I made sure that when I was adjusting for intonation, I wasn't tensing, I wasn't clamping, I wasn't doing something weird in my throat to find the right angle to be in tune. What I did find is that I had to change where I was putting my head joint ultimately, because I was using more air, and so it was going sharper. I had to start pulling out a little bit more. So again, this is setting up the body for all of those things to come later. And so if you're applying these principles to your intonation, when you're in a pinch, when you're in, the orchestra concert or the band concert, and you have to get that high F in tune, and you've already forked it and everything, then yeah, in that moment you're going to do a or something like that. But when you're preparing for solo playing or anything like that, you want to have the freedom. Usually people forgive a slightly sharp F if it's beautiful, that sort of thing. You don't want it to go too far. But yeah, I found that I was actually able to get really good at intonation when I actually wasn't trying so hard at it. And I was just setting everything up. The scales of our flutes are excellent in terms of playing in tune naturally if you just play it. So sometimes we get in our own way when it comes to intonation, is what I found. And so when I would do my intonation practice later, it was actually okay as long as I stayed relaxed and supported. You also discover that not every note needs the maximum support you can give. That's for the warm-up. But then the actual playing, I'm not necessarily supporting everything with of an airstream. You adjust it from there. Other questions? Yes. Yeah, I always warm up. I do all of this on flute before I practice piccolo, because piccolo, you can't, if you overblow it, it actually doesn't necessarily work. The piccolo is half the length, it needs less air. ultimately. And so, but I try to apply the same principles, being relaxed and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
And so when you're knowing students, how long should I warm up? Your answer is?
It depends on how much they're practicing to begin with. So, if they're only practicing 15 minutes, 5. If they're practicing 30, 10. They're practicing an hour, 15 maybe, that sort of thing. Again, it depends on the level of commitment of the student. How long, if they're not engaging with this and they're not feeling it, then they're not necessarily going to get a benefit from it. I don't impose it on them until I sense that they're ready for it. So, yeah. For me, once I get this into a routine, it takes me 25 minutes, which I have to make myself do even if I only have an hour to practice, because that 35 minutes remaining does go better. But again, you have to decide that. Like I said, when I only have the 5 minutes before a rehearsal, it's that harmonic exercise with the singing and playing. So, yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, here's the QR code for the handout. If you run into any problems with it, just feel free to email me and I'm happy to send you a copy of the PDF. My contact information is there. If you're trying any of this out and you come to any interesting revelations or discoveries that you think make it even more interesting, I would love to hear it. If you come up with any modifications of your own, please let me know. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the final day of the convention.